Everybody. This is the Standing Committee on Sport Concussions. It was pursuant to the motion adopted by the Standing Committee on Health on Thursday, October 4th, 2018. The subcommittee is resuming its study of sports-related concussions in Canada. We have two panels of witnesses here tonight. First, we welcome Commissioner Ambrosi and his counsel, Mr. Shami. Commissioner Ambrosi is going to provide an opening statement. Commissioner, I believe this is your second year at the helm of the CFL, and I know that you're pursuing a coast-to-coast-to-coast league, and we wish you well with that. You know, many of us are fans, and we're excited to hear from you today. This committee, and I speak for all members, is looking to grow sport in Canada. And what parents and community are asking of us is they would like to see our arenas, our sports fields, all areas of play to be safe for those participants, from the amateur level, from the little leagues all the way up to the majors like the CFL. So it's great that you are here with us today. The members are going to have an opportunity to ask you questions. You'll have an opportunity now to make a statement, and we look forward to hearing your answers.
Great. Thank you.
So the floor is yours,
Excellent.
Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, good evening, and thank you all for your public service, and thank you for your focus on sport, and thank you for this opportunity. In preparation for today, I read some comments from you, Mr. Chair, suggesting commissioners, and I quote, should want to grow the grassroots of their sport and have parents feel their kids are playing in a safe environment all the way through. And I couldn't agree more, and I think you will see reflected in my comments. I want to say three things today. First, I'm going to tell you that some of the steps the CFL's taken to prevent, detect, diagnose, assess, and treat concussions in particular and promote player health and safety in general. Secondly, I'm going to challenge you, and through you, challenge the government to extend your focus beyond concussions alone to overall mental health. We very much want to work with you on that. Finally, I'm going to ask you to really broaden your horizons and work with us to address what I see as a crisis: declining participation rates in football and the corresponding effect on the physical, mental, and emotional well-being of our youth. I fear we are scaring kids away from sport, and our game in particular, when we should be doing all we can to encourage them to participate. Let me say from the outset that player health and safety is a top priority for the Canadian Football League. Mr. Chairman, this is not just a motherhood statement for me, and our focus on health and safety is not just an academic exercise for me. I played for 9 years in the CFL as an offensive lineman, on top of my years in university and amateur football. And I see our players in the CFL not just as employees, but as peers, even if our careers have been separated by a decade or two. I see them as partners in building a bigger, stronger, and better CFL, and no athletes anywhere in the world do as much work in the community as ours do on issues such as opposing bullying, promoting nutrition, and combating attitudes that lead to violence against women. And I think the world of our players, and I want them to be safe. Allow me to mention just a few of the steps we have taken to make our game safer. We have lengthened our season by a week to give each team 3 bye weeks a year without a game instead of 2. Eliminated contact in practices during the regular season and playoffs, which is one of the factors that has led to a 35% decrease in injuries in practice. Adding an injury spotter to our command center, which monitors every play of every game from our Toronto headquarters, looking to identify an injury or player in distress that may not have been detected on the field or from the sideline. Put in place a comprehensive concussion protocol, which is updated annually in keeping with the best practices around the world, and which is managed exclusively by our medical staffs, and which, of course, removes a player from play if he has any symptoms of a concussion and does not allow him to return to play until he is symptom-free. Introduce mandatory baseline testing at the start of every CFL season so we can compare the brain health of our athletes particularly if they have suffered a concussion or are recovering from one. Put in place mandatory education on concussions for all of our players and officials, as well as information on the signs and symptoms of concussions, which are posted in every CFL locker room, and the use of player safety videos throughout the season that reinforce the need to eliminate dangerous and reckless play. And we co-hosted an international conference on collision sports from all around the world to share best practices and align on data collection and research. Participated in research projects that have, for example, examined active rehabilitation techniques for concussion recovery, measuring athletes' willingness to report concussions, and an assessment of the King-Devick test for diagnosing concussions. Constantly updated our rules to put an emphasis on player safety. It is now illegal, for instance, to hit a quarterback from the knees down or from the shoulders up. We work closely with our world-class medical personnel, meet with them and learn from their counterparts in sports around the globe, and engage in ongoing education and training for our equipment manager and athletic therapists. One thing we are particularly proud of is the fact that we have partnered with Football Canada to deliver a safe contact program. It has now trained and certified 13,000 amateur football coaches from across Canada in how to teach the safest blocking and tackling techniques. Football Canada is also working to ensure that kids engage in full contact at appropriate ages. By January 2022, it plans to mandate that no 12-person tackle football can be played by anyone under the age of 12. Already it is prescribed there should be no tackle football played by anyone under the age of 8. While we enthusiastically support tackle football for older age groups, we are putting a huge emphasis on flag football for young girls and boys. This year, the CFL and our member clubs invested more than $4 million in amateur football, much of it devoted to flag and touch football, as well as tackle football. We want our youth to play the game the right way, safely. When it comes to concussions and player safety in general, we do not pretend to have all the answers. We are always looking to do more and learn more. We work with our own doctors and other leading experts from around the world, but our commitment is clear. I do, however, have two concerns that keep nagging at me. The first is this. This singular focus on concussions, while addressing a valid concern, doesn't go nearly far enough. We keep focusing on one tree, albeit an important one, instead of the forest. I personally believe that we have much to do, much more to make the overall mental health of young people an important focus. Not just athletes, but all young people. 1 in 5 teens experience mental health challenges. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in this age group. But we remain far more advanced in treating sprained knees than we do a troubled mind. This isn't a sports problem, it is a societal problem. But I believe sports can set an example by taking the mental health of our athletes as seriously as their physical condition. And maybe if we can learn more about helping athletes handle the stresses of a season or a career, we can unlock better ways to help youth deal with the pressures of growing up, or athletes dealing with the pressures of juggling work and family, or our seniors with the pressures of growing older. I would like the CFL to be the first professional sports league anywhere to start each season with a mental health assessment of our players, as well as physical exams, not for evaluating an athlete, but for diagnosis and treatment. This can be an important element of concussion treatment because there is growing scientific evidence that there is a link between concussion recovery and a patient's overall mental health, particularly depression and learning disabilities. The more we understand an athlete's mental health profile, the better we can understand his or her recovery from concussion. This would be an expensive undertaking. The CFL is a Canadian institution. It is a major brand. It has a storied history. And if we work to expand our international football footprint as part of the strategy I call CFL 2.0, we have a bright future. But unlike other leagues, we do not participate in the windfalls generated by giant U.S. markets like New York and California. We are not rolling in dough. So we look to you and your government and to government to help work with us. We would very much welcome an opportunity to partner with the federal government on this. We could start with a smaller pilot project. It could even model not only for sport, but for employers everywhere. Finally, I'm worried that the ongoing and often singular focus on concussions, magnified by the media and amplified by Hollywood itself, carries with it an unintended but tragic consequence. Too many kids are not playing sports. This is certainly true in football, where participation rates are steadily declining. A study on sport participation done by the federal government in 2010 estimated 170,000 youth played football. Research for the CFL conducted in 2015 pegged that number at 136,000. Today, Football Canada estimates the total to be about 100,000, a 40% decline from a decade ago. I respect all sports, but I can tell you that football has had a transformational effect on my life, and it has had a similar effect on millions of lives. The game is incredibly inclusive. A football team needs athletes of all sizes and shapes, and as well as all sorts of skill sets. And boys and girls can play touch or flag football, as well as tackle football, or even toss the football around with their friends. Football preaches discipline and teamwork and hard work. It teaches lessons, creates friendships, and produces opportunities that literally last a lifetime. Too many kids are missing out on that because they are missing out on football. And the singular focus on concussions is one of the reasons why. It has disproportionately affected football, when the fact is other sports have higher rates of concussion. And it has created a climate of fear instead of what we want, and what I am certain you want too, a society that encourages physical activity and participation in sport. At the same time, it ensures that sport itself fosters a culture of health and safety. Encouraging kids to be physically active and to choose sport, including the sport of football, has to be an urgent priority. The Government of Canada reports obesity rates amongst children and youth in Canada have nearly tripled in the last 30 years. Diabetes has become one of the most chronic diseases amongst children and youth. A report from Children First Canada and the O'Brien Institute for Public Health found that the number of mental health-related hospitalizations amongst youth has increased 66% in the last year. And the Toronto Star reported that last year, 5,800 Canadian children and youth have committed suicide in the last 13 years, some of them as young as 8 years old. It isn't obvious that some of those overweight kids, some of those kids who developed diabetes, some of those mentally ill kids would be healthier if they were physically active, if they had a welcoming place to play, a team to be part of, and a sport to call their own. It is possible that some of those kids who took their own lives might still be with us if they would have had a teammate to talk to, a coach to count on, a game or a road trip to look forward to. Please understand what I'm saying. I want your report to call for more action on concussions, more work and more research and more funding. Of course, we would welcome all three, but at least let's match that with an effort and funding with programs and dollars designed to encourage kids to play sports, including football. Let's invest in making certain sport, including football, is possible and accessible in under-resourced and remote communities. We have taken the Grey Cup to the far north to remote Aboriginal communities, and we have conducted flag football clinics there. The three things we've heard most were, we can't believe you're here, we can't thank you enough, and we need you to come back. Please help kids in every community, rich and poor, around the corner and in remote corners of our country, enjoy the benefits of sport in general and in particular football. With all due respect, support for football in this country is underwhelming and disappointing. Years ago, the federal government adopted a funding model that favored Olympic sports and international competitions. This result is that our homegrown game, Canadian football, which is part of our history and our heritage and our culture, is too often underfunded and understaffed and really underappreciated. At times, it can feel like it's under attack. Volunteers in every corner of our country do their very best, but it's a losing battle, and our kids are losing out. So in conclusion, Mr. Chair, please, we welcome the meaningful recommendations on concussions. Those are very important. But we also ask that you and your colleagues in Parliament look beyond concussions alone to the mental health of not only our athletes, but all youth. Please engage the CFL in that work. We want to lead the way with you. And please, and this is so crucial, look at what our children and our youth are going through today. and don't make the mistake of scaring them away from sport and away from football. Encourage them to get off the couch and off the screen and out of the house. Do all you can to encourage them to play, and our kids will be healthier for it, and our country will be stronger for it, and our future will be brighter because of your work. Thank you, and I look forward to a conversation with you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for your passion, your commitment to tackling concussion, as well as to the bigger picture of mental health. We are going to move now into a question and answer from our members and answers from yourself. I do want to ask the members, we may see that the bells will start ringing shortly, and ask for unanimous consent that we stay here till about a few minutes before we need to get up to the chamber to vote. I see unanimous consent. Great. So we are going to start with questions from the Liberal side, and Madame Fortier, you will commence for 7 minutes.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Et moi, je vais...
Thank you very much. I'll be addressing you in French. So if you wish to hear the interpretation of my questions, very good. I'm happy to see you're using the earpiece. Thank you very much for your presentation. I truly appreciate that we do need to speak of mental health. Yes, indeed. Our mandate, you are hearing me? Yes, you're hearing now? Very good. I'll start again. My pleasure. Again then, thank you for your presentation. And thank you for sharing that, yes, indeed, it is important to keep in mind the mental health context, the broader context of the mental health of athletes and of young people. Of course, we have a mandate, an undertaking here, focused on concussions. And so if you can also touch on concussions in your answers, that would be helpful. So one of the questions I have about the National League is whether you have a research unit. Do you carry out research on the matter of concussions among your athletes or in the league? And if so, could you tell us how you go about studying this matter, and what do you study?
Thank you for your question. Yes, in fact, we are involved in a number of research efforts, and while we don't have a self-contained research facility within the Canadian Football League, we are working with groups in around the world of sport in engaging in the research, engaging in research on concussions specifically. Last year, for example, we co-hosted a conference on concussion sports that brought sports from around the world together, some of the leading experts from sports around the world together to talk about the best practices in concussion protocols, and to talk about some of the research that's going on to help us all gain a better and deeper understanding. So we're constantly looking to partner in the world of concussion research and brain health research, and we try to do everything possible that we can be involved in respect of concussion and brain health.
Ou encore les contributions entendues.
Could you tell us about any studies or whether the research you've heard about gives you any sign or of any way we could change the game per se, improve the game and changing the culture of sports to better protect athletes from concussion? And what can you share with us today that you know of?
Great question. And I am so proud and honored to say that the game has already changed more than you could possibly appreciate. You know, I'm an athlete who played in the 80s and early 90s, and I can tell you this version of the game is very different. It's safer. When I first started playing football in Winnipeg, the techniques that we were taught were effectively my nose to your nose. So it was essentially teaching effectively a collision between the athletes that faced one another. Today, the techniques that they're teaching children and ultimately that we're teaching the athletes at the professional level are far different. The game used to be played vertically, where the combatants went at one another almost in a direct pursuit of one another. Today, the game is played horizontally, which is to say, if you watched offensive linemen, of which I am one of, you'll note that almost on all plays, their first step is sideways. They're trying to gain ground. It doesn't have the same, it has a very different fundamental dynamic, the game today, than it had back when I played. The game, in my view, has never been safer than the game. It never been safer in its history. And we continue to look for ways to improve and involve the game. But really, it is a combination of the way the game is taught and played, but it's the culture of the game is also changing. So I would submit to all of you that that we are living in the echo of the two most violent two most violent decades in sport, the 70s and 80s. And in the 70s and 80s, if you turned your TVs on in the evening, the highlights in sports were almost always the biggest collisions and the toughest fights. That's what we watched for. And during those two eras, I think athletes were engaged in a very combative sport that was more focused on the physical combativeness than the version today, which has really been, we've refocused on the beauty of their athleticism and the big catches and the big plays. In fact, in my first season as commissioner, we called it the year of the catch, which was evidence of our own desire to reframe the narrative and the conversation around our sport, not so much for its pure physical toughness, but for the beauty and the skill that these athletes have. The game has not just changed physically; it has, and I could take you through. If we could come into the center of this circle, and I could show you just how different the techniques are taught today than they were in my era. But the more important thing is that the culture is changing. Players are learning to take care of one another. There's a greater emphasis on respecting the fact that your competitor is an athlete who's in our sport making a living playing the game and needs to be respected. And that's why we've been very tough on our discipline.
Puis si je comprends bien, vous dites que vous voulez continuer.
If I understand correctly, you want to continue to make this sport even safer. A certain amount of change has been underway, but there's still room for improvement, I take it. Could you give us a couple of examples of what you're working on now to further this movement to make football safer?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we just completed an exercise in reviewing what we call our rules committee process for the upcoming season. And one of the changes that we're making is to install an even greater penalty for making contact with a quarterback, head-to-head contact. We're going to make that a greater point of emphasis and very punitive on the team who is engaged in that behavior. We're going to further engage our command center and our injury spotter to have them play a greater role in the officiating of our games, so that our on-field officials will now be able to call up to the command center and ask them for guidance and assistance in respect of what has happened on the field. We're going to engage before the season begins to talk to our teams and our coaches and ask them to emphasize just how severe the penalties will be for play that is played dangerously and disrespects the athletes that are wearing the other uniform. So it's part of an overall, in fact, the entire Rules Committee process was really centered around health and safety. How do we make the game safer? How do we play the game safer? And as much as I can tell you the game is different today than the game I played, there's always going to be work to be done. There's always going to be the next improvement to make. I think that's one of the great qualities of the human species is we're always reaching for the next improvement, and football is part of that endeavor.
Thank you very much.
We are going to move now over to the Conservatives and Dr. Kitchen for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Ambrosi and Mr. Shamey, thank you very much for being here. I greatly appreciate that. I truly believe that Canadian football is the best football in the world, and I also believe that the Canadian Football League is the best football league in the world. So I appreciate that. It's a great game, and we need to get that out to Canadians. So I'm happy to hear you talk about youth and sport and trying to expand that down to our youth, such that we continue to focus on them being active and educating them on the safety that's out there. I noticed in your presentation, you talked about preseason assessments and you talked about baseline testing for your athletes. And I commend you for doing that. And I think that will go a long way as we further research this important issue. The Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Sport Institute Network also came out with a recent report, and it talked about baseline testing for athletes per se, especially in contact sports, et cetera. I'm wondering what your thoughts are for that sort of baseline testing, not only for professional athletes, but for our athletes as they develop from youth, from playground up to that professional level.
Yeah, we're hoping and encouraging the adoption of our best practices at the professional sport level to be adopted at the amateur sport level, but that's expensive. And it's one of the reasons why we're asking all of you and asking the government to reinstate better funding for the game of football, because we are a very underfunded sport today. We're significant. If you look at this overall Sports Canada funding, we are well down the list, and yet this is one of Canada's great games, and yet we struggle for funding. And I visit with amateur football coaches and amateur football leaders from across the country, and they all say the same thing: they're starving for resources. So part of the answer is to set a good example that these baseline tests are important. It's an important part of understanding where an athlete is, so that in the event of an injury, that you can better assess their recovery. But in order to do that, in order to have that trickle-down effect, we're going to have the government help us with funding.
Thank you for that. I mean, I take that to infer that you believe that putting that into, as if that could be afforded in these leagues, that would be a worthwhile doing that, so they have that baseline as they watch their athletes as they play.
Absolutely. Look, I think that, again, the idea of professional sports as a place where best practices are encouraged and developed, and that those best practices are shared. In fact, that has been a theme of these past 2 years, and Stephen and Shami and myself and our colleagues and our Board of Governors, that we say frequently that there's room in the CFL tent for everyone, that we are a community that wants to bring the rest of the football community and frankly all Canadians into our world and share with them the things that we know and that we're learning. Working hard right now with university sports, working with junior sports, all to share what we're learning and what we know. And the only thing that's missing in respect of being able to do that more effective is to make sure that we have the financial resources and support to do it.
Thank you. That leads me into my next question, and you mentioned it again in your report about the King Devick assessment. And it's, for those who don't know, it's a two-minute quick assessment. It has a very high sensitivity and high specificity test, but it also comes with costs. And I think that's where when you're talking about that, is the issue of costs. And is that something, I mean, as we look forward, as we move forward, how do we further educate our trainers and our sideline coaches, et cetera, on these aspects, on this one in particular? Because there is a cost to it. You have an annual cost to use it.
Yeah, the answer is that, that group, and we, as we think about the health and safety of our players, it's everyone is part of it. But, if you looked at a team, you would note that trainers, our equipment staff and trainers and athletic therapists and doctors are part of an ecosystem to help keep our players safe. Creating the resources for them to share all that they're learning and all that they know with their counterparts in amateur sport is an important, could be an important feature in making the game safer for the amateur athlete. And we're happy to do that. If you could only know, and Dr. Kitchen, I know you know and love the CFL, but if I could somehow try to share and convey with all of you just how amazing these people are that I get to work with every day, that Steve and I get to go to work with. These are some of the greatest Canadians in this country, and they love not just the game of football, but they love the country. And they are willing to share. our owners, our team leaders, our coaches, our presidents of the teams all want to share what we know and what we do with the world of sport. Our players are amongst the most selfless and most giving athletes in the world, and will go anywhere you ask them to share the knowledge that we have and the great messages we have our game. We can do so much more with your help.
You have about a minute.
Oh, I still have a minute. Oh, okay. I thought I was... okay, thank you. I still have more time. I thought I was done.
1 minute.
So very quickly, in our last committee meeting, we had Mr. Stringer here, and Mr. Gordon Stringer, his daughter Rowan, tragically passed away from head injury, and in Ontario we have the Rowan's Law. And one of the things that I will paraphrase from what he said was talking about education, and I believe that aspect of it is educating right down to our youth in not only high school but in elementary school, where they're playing flag football, et cetera, which means educating, having that sport health attitude to teach our kids to be stronger and healthier. Would you agree with that, and would you support that?
30 seconds.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, as I said, I think the culture change that we've been undergoing needs to be shared. Teaching athletes to respect one another, to see each other not just as competitors, but essentially as allies in the game. Anywhere that we can share the message of how the game should be played, and a respect for each other as athletes, and sharing that right through the food chain is important. And again, I would emphasize that our players and our athletes and our coaches and our presidents and administrative staff are all wanting to do more to help the amateur sport community.
Now we're going to move to Ms. Hardcastle from the NDP.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Ambrose, for setting out your statement and your stance for us here. I just wonder if you can help us understand a little bit better the situation with the CFL. Why has the CFL failed to or refrained from acknowledging the link between concussions and brain disease?
Well, I'd start humbly by saying I am not a doctor, nor am I a scientist. I have a Bachelor of Commerce honors degree, and if we were to want to talk about dissecting a balance sheet, I'd be your guy. I think what we're attempting to do is to follow the science, that we're talking to some of the leading, if not the leading, scientists in Canada. We're talking to and spending time with the leading scientists in the world, and we're working hard. And I say this without hesitation. I'm personally working hard to read every report I can read, to attend every conference that I can make time for, to better understand this issue. But if I may, what scientists are telling us is that yes, there have been hockey players and football players that have been diagnosed with CT. That is a fact. But there are thousands and thousands and thousands of football players and hockey players who have played the game without having CT. We've seen evidence now. In fact, Dr. Lily Naz-Harati, a Canadian neuroscientist, published a report on an autopsy of a woman who, to the best of her family's recollection, had never played sport in her life and had never suffered a concussion, and yet her brain was riddled with CTE, which is all to say it is a very complicated issue. And I am really not able to be an authority on this subject, so I am just simply following the science.
If I follow up, then my time is limited, more limited than the other members on the committee. If you bear with me, then. So, do you feel like that response, though, is sufficient enough now, given every year that goes by, we have substantive evidence and substantive science that adds to that? You mentioned the Berlin conference. cutting edge. We've had witnesses from that tell us that Canada punches above its weight. The NFL is putting significant investments into vanguard scientists that are Canadian out of Calgary. I'm just wondering, has the CFL committed to contributing to advancing the science? And if so, in what way? Has it been helping with a brain registry, or has it been funding, or what are some of the ways you think you'll be able to contribute if you can't match dollar for dollar what the NFL is doing? I understand that.
Yeah. So I'll just, if I may, Mr. Shami has just provided me with a list of the research projects that we're currently involved in. So we're involved in a process of we're in the process of completing a 2-year study with CFL players to investigate progressive active rehabilitation techniques in player recovery from concussion. This international study is being led by research from the University of North Carolina, funded by the National Football League. We're doing preliminary research to look into the impact of learning disabilities on the prevalence of concussions. The King-Devick test research, where our findings were presented at the last International Consensus Conference on Concussions in Sport, took place in Berlin in October of 2016. Joint education research study with the CFLPA to learn more about concussions and an athlete's understanding of the symptoms and their behaviors with respect to reporting concussions, and that was conducted by McGill University. Attended and presented research finding that the 5th Consensus Conference on Concussions in Sport, and presentations to the 2018 Collision Sports Conference in London.
Can we maybe have that tabled for the committee then, that list?
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Oh, that would be great if you could do that. So do you think you might join the NFL in their research?
Well, we are constantly talking with and working with the NFL on a whole number of projects.
Do you think? Sorry, but I'm trying to use my. Okay. So, yeah. Do you think there's a government role in orchestrating those kinds of joint ventures or something, or being a part of that? Do you see potential there, or would you rather see the government involved in something separate and let the sporting community do their thing? I heard you kind of saying you want us to work together, but then I kind of hear, maybe you can just clarify that or help us understand how you think our role can advance understanding.
Well, I apologize if I'm sending any mixed signals. No, we would actively welcome the government in supporting our efforts on research. We would. Look, this is like football is a team sport. Finding a safer environment for sport is also a team effort.
Absolutely. And the other quick thing I wanted to ask you about is you're talking about culture. What do you believe is the role of officiating in that culture? I heard you talk about rule changes. In other sports, we hear people that let them play, or that was an illegal hit. Why is that player not on the bench? There's all kinds of examples. Tell me a little bit about the role of officiating in your culture change or what you see.
Oh, it is an absolutely critical element of creating a safe environment. The officials on the field, the game officials, are ultimately responsible for the enforcement of the rules, and those rules are designed in large part to keep the players' safe. Yeah, we spend time every year. We do training and development with our officials. We do ongoing training with them. They review their game films with members of our league office regularly to show where there's areas for improvement. So I think it is an absolutely critical element of the sports ecosystem. And sadly, we need to get more people involved in officiating. There are statistics that would suggest that 80% of everyone who starts a career in officiating leaves officiating at the end of their first season. And why? Because they're largely abused and criticized, and it's not fun for them. We have to think about creating a culture for officiating to flourish.
Thank you. We're going to move back over to the Liberals and Mr. Ellis for 7 minutes.
Okay, and I apologize I don't sit on this committee regularly, so you'll have to bear with some of my questions here today. I see in your report here, you're saying you are finally worried about the ongoing and often singular focus on concussions magnified by the media and amplified by Hollywood itself. And I think you said that football wasn't the number one sport for concussions. So I guess what I'm asking you is, what is the number one sport if it's not football? Do you partner with these other sports agencies, I guess, to come up with best practices? And what are, I guess in the third question, I guess we'll start writing these down, sorry, is what are you doing to combat, I guess, the Hollywood, as you say in your...
Well, the specific answer, and I can tell you, just having been in Edmonton 2 weeks ago, and visiting with the Edmonton Eskimo team, Dr. Darren Nadeau, and he was sharing with me a report in Alberta, for example, where the number one sport for concussions is girls ringette, and so we are. I was surprised by that statistic, but what it says is that our team doctors, Dr. Nadeau, who, by the way, is a remarkable guy, that they're very interested and they are passionate in what's happening in the broader world of sports. So that's an example. I think the last question was, what are we doing to combat Hollywood?
Yeah, and I guess, and I go back to your numbers. You say your participation rates are down by, was it 35%? And that's drastic. So what are you trying to what?
Yeah. So we are going to launch this spring as part of our launch of our football season. We're going to launch what we're going to call a try football campaign to really encourage Canadian youth to try the game of football, and that could be flag football or touch football. It could be simply taking a football to the park and throwing it around with your family and your friends. We think just the simple act of getting that football in your hands and throwing your very first spiral is going to have a powerful effect on drawing people into our sport. But the other is that we want to start talking about the positive narrative of what the game does for people, how it changes lives. 2 weeks ago, I was with the Toronto Argonauts, and they asked me to make a number of phone calls to amateur football's volunteers. And I had a chance to speak to a remarkable woman who was telling me about her involvement as a volunteer in amateur football. And so I asked her, I said, may I ask you what got you into football? And she said, well, Randy, it's not well known. She said, but my son suffers from depression. And we took him to football for the very first time a couple of seasons ago, and it's completely changed his life. Completely changed his life. She said, he is stronger. He loves his teammates. The game of football has helped improve the quality of his life. And she says it has helped improve the quality of our family's life. And she said it is the happiest place for our family because it has transformed us. And we have to start telling those stories about how our game is playing a positive role. I talk about it on a very personal level. I wasn't a very good student for most of growing up as an elementary school student and a junior high school student. My mother came home from parent-teachers crying just about every time. And it was the game of football that led me to a love of learning, to knowing that in order to play at the professional level, I would have to become a better student. I walked around high school with one of those, and some of you may remember those old orange dictionaries, because I was a terrible speller because I had neglected my studies for so long. And it was football that inspired me to become a better student, and I graduated with an honors degree in business. And football changed my life. And we know there are tens of thousands of those stories out there that need to be told, and people need to hear that football is a force for transformation. It teaches teamwork. It teaches hard work. It teaches the value of friendship. There's so many lessons to be learned on a football field, in a football locker room, and we need to start telling those stories.
How much time do I have left?
At about 2 and a bit minutes.
Okay. So it was interesting in your report that you said that you banned full contact practices during the regular season, and that 35% of injuries went down. Is there any other ideas or anything like that that you're coming up with or considering to better protect our players?
Well, as I said earlier, this rules committee process, which we've just we haven't completed because those recommendations will now go to our board for approval. But they were all centered on issues relating to player safety and health and how to make the game safer for players. And it isn't confined to confined to activities on a football field that would relate to concussions. Some of it is just the way and the flow of the game and making sure that the players are respecting one another and they're not doing things that would unnecessarily create a hazardous situation for the players. I'm happy to report that our players and our Players Association are active members in that process. So our players are represented in that process. Our coaches are represented in that process. And every year yields new insights into things that we can do to make the game safer for our players.
Okay, thank you.
Over now to the Conservatives for our second round, and that will be 5 minutes for Mr. Nuttall.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for coming today. And there's something I just wanted to qualify that was in your statement regarding looking outside of concussions, and basically this is I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but this is a small part of a much bigger issue with mental health, etc. Were you saying that directly in relation to concussions, or were you saying that at large, writ large, regarding young people and mental health?
I'm not sure I entirely understand your question.
Well, sir, so I grew up playing soccer. I've had probably 10 occasions where, my mom had to come wake me up every hour, middle of the night, right? Been to the hospital, done the concussion check, which was not much back then, and gone through the night. And it's not been football, and I have nothing against football at all. But it felt a little bit during your statement that you were talking about the effects of the focus on concussion on football and the effects of maybe a feeling that perhaps it shouldn't be concussions we're focusing on, and it should be mental health writ large for young people, and football is a tool we can use to help certain people struggling with mental health issues. And I guess, and sir, I'm not grandstanding because I'm not running again. There's no grandstanding here. But I can tell you that I agree with you on the mental health subject. Our health committee is focusing on the mental health subject. I agree with you on team sports, especially for demographics that don't have access. It is incredibly important, and that's actually where I come from. But there is a focus on this because it is a very, very serious issue. And I'm glad to hear the CFL is making changes and has made changes, quite frankly, has made changes in the past on these items. But when we're here because there's a lot of people in our ridings who are, bringing forward these issues with their young ones who have been going through this. In my riding, I have Concussion North, which is basically a state-of-the-art facility, not because of the building it's not a very nice building, but because of all of the different doctors they have in place who are volunteering their time to make it happen. And I just want to make sure that we aren't, as we go through this process, I don't want any sports organizations to feel like they're under attack. But I do want the sports organizations to take this as seriously as we are. And it just, to me, felt a little bit like, hey, this issue is hurting us a little bit. Maybe we should focus on this other thing over here. And that's not what I wanted to hear today. I do like hearing some of the other stuff in terms of what you've done and what you'll continue to do, the constant audits, the looking at the research out of the CFL, working with the best Canadian minds, all for that. But I had a real issue with that.
Well, I can promise you I wasn't trying to deflect from the importance of the subject of concussions, not at all. In fact, I think we can stand on what is, I hope, obvious, a lot of effort being made to make the game safer, to take the issue of concussions take the issue of concussions seriously as any professional sports organization in the world. What I was simply saying is that what we know is that there is a connection between mental health and concussion recovery, and we are not doing enough in that field.
On that portion of the concussion.
That's right,
Okay,
and in fact, but it does speak to the broader opportunity, one that I think have together, and that is, we know, for example, that we do annual medicals. Those are physical medicals. That is to make sure that knees and ankles and fingers and toes are in good working order. I'm suggesting that we believe that a focus on mental health as part of the annual physical, the annual medical checkup would help, because it could establish a better understanding of an athlete's mental state. And are there issues there that in the event of a concussion would lead us to understand that it may take them longer to recover? Those things can have a profound effect on the overall health of the overall mental health issue, because if our players, for example, are leaders in accepting a mental health assessment as part of being a good professional athlete, then perhaps we can start changing the culture on mental health, and that our players who could speak to the value they get from having a mental health checkup as part of their overall health assessment can begin to enhance the narrative on mental health being as important as physical health.
And
That was what I was trying.
Yeah, we're done. Yeah.
That's our time. I do want to thank the CFL Commissioner Ambrosi, Mr. Shami. Thank you for that introspective understanding of what is happening within the CFL. It took a lot of courage to come here to this standing committee on sport-related concussions, and to provide some information that we were all looking for at the highest level, at the professional level of sport in football. So thank you so much, and we wish you much success with the league.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could just say thank you. We greatly respect and appreciate what you're attempting to do, and we will do everything we can to support your efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Now we're going to suspend. Call suspend, yeah.
Thank
So welcome back, everybody. And just before we get started with our second panel, I'd like to, all members should have a motion in front of them. And this is to set a deadline for our briefs to come to committee. So the subcommittee must establish a deadline for submissions of briefs to ensure that they have all been translated and distributed to members before commencing the study of the draft report. Translation and distribution of briefs could take a total of 3 weeks. Therefore, proposed submission deadline is Friday, April 12th, 2019. Everybody is in agreement? Yes? Okay, wonderful. And so we ask that all those get come through our portal, and so that our analysts can do their work and we can incorporate them into our report.
If I may, can
Madam
you
Portier.
maybe just give us an idea of the next weeks, how we're going to continue with the exercise we're doing, just to understand the calendar? So this is for the briefs?
This is for the briefs,
Submission.
yeah. So the brief submission, so any groups that you may have, Madame Fortier or anybody
others.
or others that would like to submit.
They have
That
till
we know we've had a great deal of interest in the committee, and we have not been able to accommodate all witnesses. So therefore, we have opened our portal to be able to make those submissions. But so the translation and the
Excellent.
analysts can incorporate those into their report.
And we
would
will
need them.
continue.
We'd need those by the 12th of April.
And we continue to meet with witnesses
Until May 1st. Is that we have May 1st?
And we have the whole calendar already organized for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And now we'll be introducing our second panel. And we want to welcome the Canadian Olympic Committee, now via video conference from BC, Dr. McCormick. Welcome. And as well as the Canadian Association of Soccer, and Mr. Kevin Gordon is with us here in person. And both will have a opening statement. We are going to start with Dr. McCormick. Since he is coming from BC via video conference, we know sometimes technology has let us down. So we see that we can have a clear view of yourself, Dr. McCormick. Can you hear us?
I can.
Okay, wonderful. And so you'll have an opportunity now to make your opening statement, and then we'll move to Mr. Gordon's opening statement. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak before the committee today. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there. I do represent the Canadian Olympic Committee, and I'm the Chief Medical Officer, or the head physician for our Canadian Olympic team. In my role in high-performance sport over the last 3 decades, I've had the privilege of working at many multi-sport events, such as the Olympics and Pan American Games, and I've been the head physician for several of our senior national teams, many of which are at high risk for concussion. I also act as the lead physician for the BC Lions in the Canadian Football League and work with the Vancouver Whitecaps in the MLS. So I've had exposure to this problem of sport concussion. And in addition to working in the trenches, I've also been involved in sports safety from the policy perspective. I sit on the Health and Safety Advisory Board for the CFL, and I'm on the Medical Commission for the Pan Am Sports, which is the group that determines health policy at the Pan American Games for North and South America. Getting back to my role with the Canadian Olympic Committee, as the Chief Medical Officer, I'm the lead for health policy, and I can say with confidence that at COC, the health of our athletes is our top priority, and we're proud of that. Concussions have been a focus of ours for years, and we recently completed an extensive collaboration with the medical leads from the Canadian Olympic and Paralympic Sports Institutes, On the Podium, and the Canadian Paralympic Committee. And from this, we announced some sport-related concussion guidelines designed to protect our senior national team athletes and next-gen athletes in high-risk sports. Again, it's what it is. We've focused on that high-performance group that are also high risk for concussions. We take pride in this because this is actually one of the first efforts where we've been able to standardize our approach across the country. And that's taken a lot of work, as you might imagine, but we think it's a positive step forward for the sport and medicine community. They're consistent with the international consensus documents, like from Berlin, that I'm sure you've heard about. And we've worked coordinated with Parachute Canada, but there are some unique features of our high-performance system that allow us to deliver some unique services. So these include that during preseason, prior to the first game of training camp, we recommend that all high-risk athletes complete a battery of clinical assessments and neuropsychological tests under the guidance of the team physician. This is beyond what Parachute recommends for sport-related concussion. For high-risk sports, and again, this is the high-performance pool, we recommend that a certified athletic therapist, physiotherapist, chiropractor, or physician be at all training and competition. And if a concussion is suspected, of course, the player is immediately removed from training or competition, and they are to be assessed by a member of the health team in a distraction-free environment. Sometimes the diagnosis of a concussion can be challenging, and it needs somebody with experience and expertise to be able to make the decision whether it's safe to return in that session, whether it be, again, competition or training. Post-concussion, if the athlete is determined to be, by the medical team, to be free of symptoms at rest and with exertion, we suggest that the athlete be, again, tested with neuropsychological tests so that we can compare the results to their individual baseline. We can do this because we have a network of experts that have been involved in sports medicine, as the interpretation of the results of these tests takes training and experience. The last thing is that the guidelines lay out recommendations for when the athletes can return to sport, and there are four. First, there have to be a resolution of symptoms at rest, no recurrence of symptoms when they're doing exercise at the levels required for competition and training, and that the athlete, again, have those neuropsychological tests repeated to make sure they're back to baseline. And finally, that the athletes have further education on the risks of premature return to sport and the risks of repeated concussion, and they sign a consent to that effect. These guidelines will be in place prior to the Olympic and Paralympic Games in 2020 in Tokyo, and will also be used at the Pan Am Games in Lima, Peru this summer. However, it's important to recognize that, as you know, this is an evolving area with ongoing research, and there's much more that needs to be done, and this requires support. I know the committee has heard this before, and I would say that we wholeheartedly support funding research. Having said that, we can be proud of the fact that Canadians have been real leaders in knowledge development and in translation when it comes to sport-related concussion. Because things are evolving rather quickly, the high-performance guidelines referred to will be reviewed annually to make sure that they're kept up to date. I've been in this for a fairly long time, and this issue of sport-related concussion has actually come a long way. While there's work to do, we have made a lot of progress, including rule changes that have occurred in almost all high-risk sports, enhanced equipment, better education of athletes, the support staff, coaches, family, and the general public. We've also worked to change the culture that has glorified the hellacious hit. All these measures, I believe, have led to improved diagnosis, treatment, and most importantly, prevention. On a different note, though, although we as health professionals prioritize health care, we have to recognize that we will never have risk-free sport. And while we want to make it as safe as possible, we have to be careful not to magnify the problem of sport concussion to the point where we reduce the level of physical activity in Canadians. The greatest health risks we face as a society relate to obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and a host of other major medical issues that are related to inactivity. Exercise is medicine, and we need to promote active lifestyles with options for everyone. So in closing, thank you again for having me. The very existence of this committee speaks to the importance of this and the need for a discussion and dialogue. At the COC, we're proud that we've prioritized our athletes' health, and we've taken steps to develop a consensus that we can be applied across the country and when we go to games. And it's a collaborative effort that will continue and it must continue. So thanks again for your attention, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. McCormick. And as a Canadian Olympian, and I want to thank you for the service that you've provided to the COC and continue to bring, as well as how you are able to bridge between amateur sport as well as your work with professional sport leagues. Thank you. We're going to move over now to Mr. Gordon, and for your statement, sir.
Thank you. Canada Soccer is the official governing body for soccer in Canada. In partnership with our members, Canada Soccer promotes the growth and development of soccer in Canada from grassroots to high performance and on a national scale. Soccer is the largest participatory sport in Canada and is considered to be the fastest growing sport in the country. I am an academic child neurologist with epidemiology and biostatistics training. My clinical practice of the last 2 decades has primarily dealt with the clinical management of complex pediatric concussion, along with research and training. In 2010, I joined Canada Soccer's Sports Medicine Committee. Our committee comprises cardiology, rehabilitation, sports physiology, orthopedics, physiotherapy, emergency medicine, sports medicine, and child neurology. We are advisory to Soccer Canada in medical affairs as they apply to our players. On behalf of Soccer Canada, I'm also a member of the Federal Provincial Territorial Concussion in Sport Working Group, and who have worked effectively to get sport, health, education, and governments working in consort on concussion. Our chairs, Jocelyn East and Greg Gunther, will be presenting before this committee in an upcoming meeting. But our Sports Medicine Committee and Canada Soccer's focus is the nearly 1 million registered active participants within the 1,200 clubs that operate in 13 provincial and territorial member associations. In 2017, we had 640,000 youth players under 19 years of age registered to play soccer, of whom 40% are female. Concussion is a significant acquired brain injury, whether acquired through sport, play, mishap, or other etiology. Soccer concussions occur as the result of player-to-player collisions and aerial challenges. Our female soccer players are disproportionately exposed to this injury, with injury rates as high as 50% higher when compared to male soccer players. Prevention is the key, but preventative efforts are in their infancy. We know that by keeping our goalposts anchored to the ground, our balls light and not overly inflated, and the rules of the game enforced, there will be an impact on the incidence of brain injury. Secondary prevention of the complications of concussion through the early recognition of potential concussion, removal from play, and referral for diagnosis and the subsequent confirmation that a player is clear of concussive symptoms before they return to full gameplay is likely to ensure that this generation of players is much safer than the previous generation of players who played sport without these directives. The concussion landscape is changing very rapidly in Canada. Canada Soccer saw the adoption of its first global concussion policy for the broader membership, subtitled Players' Health and Safety First, in 2016. And as a team sport, Canada Soccer was excited to become compliant with the Canadian concussion guidelines in 2018, joining the near 24 national sports organizations with a national standardized approach to concussion. No longer is there the variable patchwork of protocols for some sports at national levels. Over the next year, we expect that our provincial soccer organizations will move to compliance with the Canadian Concussion Protocol, further expanding a consistent national approach to concussions. Within the Sports Medicine Committee, we continually monitor published and unpublished information about concussions in general and specifically brain injury in soccer, sharing the press and public's appetite to understand this injury. We also share the frustration that the necessary research to make the best evidence-based decisions for our sport and our players has been slow to arrive. On behalf of Canada Soccer's Sports Medicine Committee, I welcome your questions.
Dr. Gordon, thank you very much. And we are going to move right now to questions and answers, and we are going to commence with the Liberals and Mr. Ellis for 7 minutes.
To Mr. McCormick, you talked about high-risk category of sports, and you considered what are considered high risk and what are considered low risk, I guess. And what led to the decision not to require all sports to have a concussion protocol in place?
Well, all sports do have concussion protocols in place, but the sports that we've put in these enhanced guidelines for, I'll read them out because there's more than my simple brain can remember. On the Olympic side, winter sports would be alpine skiing, freestyle skiing, ski jumping, snowboard, speed skating, short track and long track, figure skating, ice hockey, bobsleigh, skeleton, and luge. And on the para side, on the winter, we would add para-alpine, para-snowboard, and sledge hockey. In the summer sports, the high-risk ones on the Olympic side would be boxing, wrestling, soccer, rugby, basketball, cycling, that'd be track, road, BMX, and mountain biking, equestrian, field hockey, gymnastics, trampoline, handball, judo, synchronized swimming, taekwondo, volleyball, water polo, diving, and in athletics, pole vault. And then on the para side, we'd add paracycling, para-equestrian, judo, sitting volleyball, soccer 7-a-side, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby, goalball, and wheelchair athletics. And the reason we have focused on those sports is because that's where the higher incidence is, and it becomes a resource issue. These programs take resources, and in a limited envelope of funding, we have to decide where to best put these enhanced services.
You said, and I tried to write this down, you said somebody for concussion is free to come back on full return. So what's full return? Do you guys require, is it a position of the Canadian Soccer Association to require a letter from a doctor, or how do you...
Part of the Canadian concussion guidelines, you have to be assessed with suspicion of a concussion and cleared before you're allowed to return. And at the end of a concussion, you are to be assessed again to confirm that the concussion has resolved.
So does Soccer Canada collect data on soccer-related concussions?
At the present time, no.
Is there a plan?
In a systemic way.
Okay.
It's very hard to do that. Our registration is done at the provincial level, so it would have to be somewhere further away from Soccer Canada.
So it would have to be with other sports organizations and such?
Or on a global Canadian level.
Okay. In your view, could medical assessment letters and medical clearance letters that are part of the parachute concussion guideline be used as a means of maintaining a registry of concussions?
We've certainly seen in a number of sports with insurance the underreporting by way of insurance, so I would suspect that that would be inadequate.
Okay, thank you. That's the end of mine.
We'll move over to the Conservatives now for 7 minutes. Mr. Kitchen, Dr. Kitchen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and doctors, thank you both for being here today. I much appreciate it. And your testimony is very helpful. Dr. McCormick, I've read the recent Canada Olympic Paralympic Sport Institute Network and the paper you published, and in that, as you indicated, you talked a lot about, it's included within it is on the issue of pre-testing of athletes, and I'm interested to follow up on that a little bit. as to whether you feel that this is something that all medical professionals should have that information prior to a season starting.
It's a challenge because it's a fairly difficult to interpret the results of this neuropsychological testing, and really I don't think there is a broad enough base of practitioners that have that knowledge at the moment. So really, again, gets back to the reason we focused on the high performance athletes is because we're often under pressures of time, and we want to make sure that we give the best care to the athletes that are representing us internationally and our national treasures. So maybe in a perfect world, we had baseline neuropsychological testing in all sports, but right now in Canada, there was simply not the capacity for that.
Right. So with that said, though, there definitely, I'm assuming you're okay with there being actually a pre-testing of number of psychomotor skills, health, obviously, orthopedic, neurologic, basic having that baseline to start off with, though, correct?
Baseline is always helpful, and I think can be very valuable. And if you have a baseline, it's much easier to interpret injury.
Would you say that would be of value, not just at your level, but also at when we take that down from the Olympic, Paralympic level, but also down to junior hockey level, to some of the more what's the word I'm looking for? Basically, in soccer, for example, in the other, basically the high level performance of whether it may be tiered teams, whether they're 12 years old, going all the way up to 18, 20.
Well, the reason that Parachute Canada has not recommended baseline testing is because done in isolation, without appropriate interpretation, it actually is not helpful and can actually cause challenges. So you need to have the whole system in place, and that was simply one part of it. And that's the question, is how do we deliver that expertise across the entire sports community and grassroots level? Where you draw the line, I think it does come back to the resources, and not only financial resources, but expertise that's available to be able to interpret those tests and administer them.
In the utopian world, it would be of value, though, if costs were not an issue.
My perspective is that yes, it would be of value, and that's one of the reasons it's done in virtually all professional sports, and and we've taken it on for the high risk, high performance athletes.
Great, thank you. Dr. Gordon, I have my coaching levels in soccer, and I also have a number of other sports, but and I can say that I don't believe I ever had a concussion playing soccer, although I did break my nose at the age of 18 by an elbow while I was going to head a ball, and there may have been one then, but in those days we didn't talk about it that way. But I had them from I played rugby, so there are other ways. But so in soccer, obviously you're putting player health and player safety first is extremely important. I'm a big believer in education and continuous education, and not only from a professional point of view, but also disseminating that down to our coaches, down to our managers, down to our trainers that are there on the field day in, even our soccer moms that are coming there every day to watch their children play. Can you just tell us some of the steps that Soccer Canada has taken to expand that? I know in hockey we've put in training requirements for trainers to be on the bench, et cetera. Can you just explain some of that for us?
Okay. I think we're going to come back to the fact that every sport in Canada is moving to a compliance in Ontario with Rowan's Law. So we all are pushing a form of education of one sort or other. And I think really the issue of not only education, because I think everyone needs to be educated about this as an injury, and I would address, if I could get everyone in this country to look at the concussion recognition tool before sending their kid out on a field, I think the world would be a much safer place. So I would agree with you wholeheartedly. The other thing I think we have to do is look out for one another. Once we've been educated, we need to recognize it. Athletes need to recognize it in other athletes. Coaches need to recognize it. And one of the problems is the relative scarcity of this injury in the younger age groups. A coach may spend years before he has a kid with a concussion to assess. Now, if they get up into the 14 to 15-year-olds, that's a little less often, but when they're younger, the coaches just don't have the experience with it. And so they may have a lifetime experience in some of these sports of maybe having seen one or two children with concussion, and it becomes quite challenging for them. So we can educate, but we all need to be educated.
Do I?
Yeah, we're good. Yes, yeah. So we're going to be moving to the NDP and Ms. Hardcastle.
Thank you very much, doctors. And I'd like to start with Dr. Gordon. Can you tell us a little bit more of how or what the evidence you've gathered is and how responsive you've been able to be with rules so that you can reduce injury, like for instance, the zero tolerance that rugby has done for the head hits, the volleyball. Like, what are your steps and what was your evidence?
As I pointed out to you earlier, very much in the infancy, okay? I would, in getting ready for this committee, was stressed to find primary preventative evidence within our field, but I think we have to go back 20 years. We started to realize that there were a lot of head injuries through soccer goalposts tipping over. So from a perspective, I'm seeing some head shaking here. So they were in the era of the unanchored goalposts, and just the simple fact that all soccer goalposts are generally anchored and everyone is aware that there's a tip over risk. Now, those weren't just concussions. Those were some pretty significant brain injuries. The other thing that I think I was talking about is that it was our own Rudy Giddens of the Soccer Canada, the precursor to our current sport medicine committee, who did work with one of the biomechanics firms here in the city and recognized that if you overpump a soccer ball, there is far more striking force to an individual doing a header. And that has largely been transmitted across the world in terms of making sure that the balls are not overpumped. There was a huge trend at one stage to get a more livelier ball by overpumping it. And again, I'm seeing some heads nodding because everyone liked those lively balls, but they hurt when you hit you, and they had more force involved, and they were dangerous. So that has been adopted across the sport. Now, there are two studies that are really quite interesting that we need to talk about. One is a Norwegian study, and what it did is it looked at just taking rules that are currently in play and enforcing them in aerial contests a lot more rigorously, and they were able to show a significant reduction of injuries. And a German league put that into place, and that also. But those came up in the last Berlin conference, and they suggested that more vigorous endorsement may produce effects. We're not quite to the point of, yes, it does, but it's getting to the point where we need to start talking about things of this nature. We have not as yet adopted it.
Okay, thank you. And maybe if with time for the both of you, I guess I want to know a little bit more about the COC has baseline testing recommendations, but we have different organizations that take a different approach. What are we ready to decisively recommend or say that we need baseline testing, or is that also part and parcel of the research that we need to be doing in terms of concussion in sport? Okay.
One of the challenges you have to, when you address the issue of baseline testing, is realize that the bulk of our players are youth players. And that means that their baseline changes at least once a year and possibly twice a year. So you're going to have to put them in a testing paradigm that goes over and over and over to get a baseline. And that is a huge number. Okay, it will add substantively to the cost of sport. And yet, many of the practitioners out there don't rely on baseline testing because it just isn't available and people have learned to work without it. Having said that, when we wrote our guidelines, because our guidelines were to be inclusive across Canada Soccer, we did make the following line, and I think it's fair to point out because we're dealing with two different things. Professional and national level players typically have access to an enhanced level of medical care, which means that their concussion and their return to play can be managed in a more closely monitored way. That's a euphemism for that there's a baseline that we have to get to everyone, and some of our high risk, very high risk players need to be monitored more closely. This has come up for us where many of our national team players come to us from professional clubs, and those professional clubs have baseline testing as part of their paradigm. And therefore, when we take the players for our use, we have to adhere to their paradigms as well. But from a youth perspective, really, I'm not sure it's as necessary, and I understand where Parachute was coming from. And so we don't have anything in our paradigm about doing baseline testing on youth and recreational players.
So was Soccer Canada involved then directly with developing the guidelines, the soccer component of the guidelines? Were you involved in developing the soccer component of
Yes.
Okay, so is there a little bit of a gap then in understanding of, like, how are we, is this just a matter of interpretation, or is it a matter of not enough knowledge, not just not enough resource, I guess is what I'm getting at. Like, is the issue miscommunication, or
No,
is the issue...
I don't think it's miscommunication. I think most practitioners in the field are not relying on on testing at this stage. There are further issues. We can get into this. One of the issues is, what do you do when you fail your baseline test?
Yeah.
Okay, and that means that we've got to, if we're rolling that out, first off, the test has got to be cheap. It's got to be globally available. I've already heard, Dr. McCormick has pointed out, you need expert people to do the interpretation of those tests.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and you can't afford to have any significant proportion of the population failing the test. Because if you fail the test, then what are you going to do with them? Not let them play sport?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the fundamental issue.
Okay, thanks.
Moving over to the Liberals now, and I understand Mr. Bazio and Mr. Saini will be splitting some time. Mr. Saini, you've got a question, and then Mr. Bazio the rest of the time.
Yeah, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Thank you to both of you for coming here. Just to frame the question a bit, my background is I'm a pharmacist by profession. And so when I was sitting here listening to you, a couple of things crossed my mind. One was that I have never been trained as a pharmacist in, outside of the basic, really basic things of how to, diagnose a concussion or something of that nature. And the reason I'm saying that is I think there might be a lot of medical professionals that maybe not even at the medical level, yes, at the doctor level, but not at the pharmacy or nursing level, where sometimes you see more patients than doctors do. But the main point I want to make is that, soccer is a worldwide sport, and there are countries that have more entrenched leagues and soccer players as compared to Canada. Has there been any attempt to go to Europe or other countries to sort of look at best practices? Because I don't think this is a Canadian phenomenon. I think this would be an international phenomenon with sport, but with other sports. Well, hockey generally is, Europe and North America. Football obviously is North America. But has there been any attempt to go to other countries to learn from best practices, especially in those societies where soccer is more ingrained than maybe in Canada?
Yes, there has. Specifically, what I would talk about is that our concern about the health and safety of players who, from a head injury perspective, I think there are two components, and it's frequently the issue of concussion and the issue of repetitive head trauma. And I think everyone's worried about both. I don't know which one we worry more about, but from a repetitive head trauma perspective, the Football Association in the UK is now 18 months into something they call the field study. It's headed by Dr. Stewart. We have been in touch with the FA. We're going to follow that study with interest. It will talk about the long-term follow-up from a health benefits and harms of playing soccer.
And just a quick final to that. Has there been any attempt, because like I said, in many cases, a parent might go to a soccer game, something happens, they don't deem the injury important enough or maybe mild that they don't need to go see a doctor, but they may come either to see a pharmacist or another health practitioner. Has there been some attempt for educational outreach to make things a little bit more clear to other medical professionals as to what signs specific to look for outside of just the normal things? Or
and we came up to the very start of this. Education is foremost. I would agree with you that 1 in 4 patients with a reported concussion does not seek medical care. And that group is quite interesting because obviously we don't know a lot about them. And they would be picked up by a more global sense of concussion. I think we are educating the next generation of parents and individuals. This is an injury outside of sport that is going to affect 1 in 200 Canadians next year.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give my time, Mr. Bosio.
Okay. I guess a lot of it is how do we measure the data, right? How do we derive the data in the first place? And that seems to be a great challenge, especially in amateur, recreational soccer. I can understand why it's an impossible task almost. Other than as you said, trying to educate parents, parent coaches. I myself have coached basketball and other sports, and really had no understanding of concussion, what kind of protocol to put in place. Are you finding that I mean, I know, basketball and hockey and soccer as well all have great organizations in place to try to disseminate and push that data out into, or not the data, but that education out into the amateur level. How do you feel that, what do you think it's going to take to get it out there completely? What different tools need to be made available so that parents and I know we've got all kinds of web tools now and webinars and everything. Is that being utilized though in this specific area? Webinars to actually illustrate what to look for, the telltale signs?
That's a complex question. I think the fundamental answer is yes, but I would say that I'm a pediatric neurologist. I started this when my own kid was concussed 20 years ago, and I was looking over my shoulder for the emergency doc because my formal training as a neurologist who looks after children did not involve concussion. Now, 20 years later, I'm here in front of you, and I know that most of the kids on my kids' teams are just as good at recognizing concussion. In fact, I'm thrown back to a national championships where I didn't recognize the concussions, but the kids told me exactly when it happened on the field. I missed it, but the kids are getting better at this. And I think one of the things that came from Rowan's inquest is really the issue that this is a community injury. We all are responsible. Pharmacists, parents, coaches. And I think one of the problems we have is the field is moving so quickly right now that some of us who had our coaching certification a few years ago are out of date. And it's time to recert because things are changing so very rapidly on this field that I'm amazed. I mean, as I said, it's truly amazing. You have to keeping up with the field.
You were talking.
I have to say one thing. 1 month ago, the first of the trials for exercise became published, showing that exercise is actually a valid treatment for concussion. We've been waiting for that. Now it's out, the first of the trials. So life is changing. I'm sitting back and changing what I'm doing clinically again.
And so I mean, it's a great point though. Where is that? What was where did that clinical data come from to show now that it was? I mean, are we seeing more and more clinical studies being done to get a better understanding
Yes.
of concussion all the time?
Yes.
And are those just Canadian, or are we looking at American, European?
Oh, the Canadians are 4 times more likely to be on the primary authors of the articles. We own this condition. I would recommend anyone to go Google concussion under Google Trends. Canada's #1 on this area.
Okay, fantastic.
Moving over to the Conservatives now and Dr. Kitchen for 5 minutes. This is our second round.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, and it's great information. I appreciate that, and I'll try and make sure I get both of you involved in the questioning. Very quickly, you talked about, which we've heard before as well, is that in soccer, basically we're looking at women have a 50% higher proportion of concussions than men. There's been some research that talks about neck strength and the value of that, definitely at the younger age, and maybe, although one assumes that it's being looked at the Olympic and Paralympic level, it may not be. So quickly from both of you, if I could get a response to that. I'll start with Dr. Gordon.
The neck strengthening has, first off, data. If you do a cross-sectional study of high school athletes, neck strength will predict the likelihood of concussion in the following year. And that's an older study now, and we were all enthused when it came out because we thought the trials will be underway to prove that neck strengthening can prevent concussion. They had a lead time on the exercise trials. We have no data yet on neck strengthening making any effect for subsequent concussion. We're all waiting still. Okay.
Do you have any response?
The same that there's lots of research. There are people who are doing trials looking at neck strengthening with all kinds of fancy gizmos, and the data is just not there yet. I will, if I may, come back to one other comment that was made earlier from the NDP member about baseline testing. That I think not only is there the changing baseline in children, but I think the problem is actually much simpler at the grassroots level. We really just need to get that out. When in doubt, sit them out. The reason we do these enhanced things with athletes is they're in the middle of playoffs. The Olympics are coming up, and it's once every 4 years or once in a lifetime for them. And we're trying to see how quickly can we get them back when is it safe. But when we're talking about a child's brain, we don't need neuropsychological tests to assess them. And because we shouldn't be pushing the envelope to get them back to high-risk situations.
Thank you. One of the things that we've heard throughout our study has been on data collection and how sparse it is and how hard it is to do it. We've heard from a couple of organizations that actually have apps that collect data. Some are free, some are costly. So the challenge we have is we want to collect that data so we can get the research, but also we want to collect that data so that it can be shared at the same time as protecting the privacy of the athlete and the privacy of the family. And there's such a program that will collect that data without sharing the personal information, but allow, for example, someone that's playing soccer gets a concussion during the soccer season and then goes into hockey, and that data that there's a concussion there can be accessed by the coach or the organization that they're moving into without sacrificing that. How valuable is that, and what steps have you seen in going forward on this? Dr. McCormick?
So always more data is useful. It's the question really of the quality of the data. You really have to make sure that the numerator and denominator actually are valid to be able to make sound judgments off of it, and that's sometimes a challenge. What I think I heard you saying is that we need something that when an athlete changes sports, we pick up their previous history, which can be relevant. And that may be different than actually a database of all concussions. That may be a questionnaire when the people start a new sport. Have you had a previous concussion? At the professional level, that's what we do. Have you ever had a previous concussion? How many? When was your last one? How much time did you miss? Because that's useful information for us to assess the risks and how we are to manage them. So I think there's two separate issues there, a research tool to look at incidents and the effect of treatments. And registries like that aren't always perfect data. And then the second question is, how do we protect athletes that go between sports?
Moving over to the Liberals now, and Mr. Bosio for 5 minutes.
Yeah, and this question is for Mr. McCormick. You've got a ton of experience, both on the Olympic side and with a number of different other professional sports. And what rule changes do you see that should be implemented that would lead to less concussions in the first place? Once again, prevention is, I think, the number one goal that we all have to look towards. And are you finding that there's a lot of pushback from professional sports? That you feel that if that wasn't there, you could see that change would occur to the rules.
So I would agree with the comments that Dr. Gordon made earlier that rules are in place, and there's been virtually every sport has had changes in rules. The automatic red card for an elbow in soccer is one that comes to mind with me that changed the incidence of concussions in that sport. So every sport has the rules. It's a question of enforcement, and that is a challenge. Referees are under a lot of stress. We still have Hockey Night in Canada, the NFL opening up with these massive hits. And I can say, sitting on the sideline, there still is a culture when, in a collision sport, when a player makes a significant hit, there is enthusiasm and almost pride in it on the sideline, which it's going to take time to change. And one of the challenges is when we see it on the media all the time, that glorifying these hits, when personalities put out tapes that just are a collection of these hellacious hits, when the pros actually take pride in it, there's a trickle-down effect to the grassroots. So part of it is going to be changing the culture.
That a lot of that culture, we've evolved a long way. I mean, I'm going back 45 years ago when I had my first concussion, and I had multiple concussions playing multiple different sports because I love to play sports. I'm so grateful that things have changed since that time, because there was virtually no protocol. I sat out a couple of games and then you're right back in there. So it has evolved quite a bit. And what changes do you think could be made? Yes, culture, of course, we have to continue, but it's through those rule changes that we actually see an improvement in the sport that is then making it culturally, the cultural changes occurring as a result of the rule changes, right? I think most people now would agree that in hockey, the fact that we have far less fighting, far less of those big hits, that it's actually improved the game tremendously from a speed and agility and the free movement that happens in the game now. Are there any rules, though, that you could see? Once again, yes, I know it changes different for every single sport, but if you had anything there that you really, this, if I could do this, I know it would make a difference in sport.
It does vary from sport to sport, but I think of a few things that come to mind. I think there's a move away from having full contact at the minor levels, whether it be football or rugby that are collision sports. Part of the challenge is the traditions of the sport. I remember all the challenges we had trying to, despite having solid data, to convince Hockey Canada to remove body checking at the younger ages. Eventually, after a lot of pressure, they came around, but their most vulnerable group are those young, and I'm, of course, speaking more at the high performance level, but I see it in my clinical practice. It's the young athletes that are the ones we are most worried about. So avoiding unnecessary exposures to them with rule changes and perhaps the type of sport they're in. If they're playing flag football instead of tackle football, you can learn the skills, you can be active, and then later when you've got better neck strength, better balance, proprioception, and a more developed brain, you can then decide if on your own if you want to add higher risk things like the collision sports. I think that every sport is looking at what they're doing, and again, working in the CFL, every year there are rule changes, and the majority of them are actually based on how can we make the game safer. And every sport is doing that, trying to say, what do we need to address this epidemic of sport concussion? And then you have to overcome the traditions of the sport. Sometimes it's a little tough sell. Once it's in place, you have to get the referees that are going to enforce it, and you have to have the public that are going to accept it. And all of those are barriers, I would suggest.
Dr. McCormick, thank you. Mr. Bosio, just before we move out to the NDP, I've got one quick question, if you give me the liberty. Dr. Gordon, you brought up that female soccer players are disproportionately exposed to this injury, with injury rates as much as 50% higher when compared to male soccer players. What is the root cause? Have you found the root cause to that?
We all wish we knew. We don't. Okay, certainly the female concussion within females is one of the hottest subgenres of concussion research at the present time, and we're all looking for answers to that question. We certainly know that females across many athletic injuries are at higher risk, but this is distressing in terms of what is the issue for females in particular, because the rates in soccer take soccer from a sport that approaches hockey. Sorry, I'm not supposed to complain about the other guy's sport, but our female soccer players have pretty high rates of concussion. And why is that? So I think other researchers are working on this field, and certainly my Twitter feed blows up regularly on females and concussions.
Okay, well, thank you. And I want to impress on both of you as leaders and influencers that this committee, as we look into sport-related concussion, we are looking to expand the amount of participants in sport in Canada. And we believe, and we know, the numbers show us that in sports that have high concussion rates, the numbers are dropping, and dropping significantly in some sports. So for the viability of those sports, for them to continue to be able to change direction and grow, this is very important, and your advocacy can help that happen. So thank you. We're going to move over now to the NDP and Ms. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree, and your comments are really intriguing, and that's part of what we're doing here. Is some of it seems almost like the culture change and a little more philosophical approaches to sport, not glorifying certain things, and other aspects of the study are more logistical, like about data collection. So who should be doing data collection, if I can go back to that for a minute? Is that something that should be team and sport organizations that keep, or do you think that's something that should be for the doctor, for the medical professional who's issuing the clearance, or both? How do you do it right now? How about you both tell me how you do it right now? How does it work?
I think Bob really hit it on the nail. Take the history at the beginning of the season. I was struck when he was talking about that patient of one of mine, a girl who came in with a history of 2 superimposed concussions, who had actually had 4 of them superimposed. And she described when she was told she could no longer play hockey, and she said, "That was okay. It's rugby season next week." And I throw that back because that was 15 years ago. I have not heard anything that egregious in my clinic in the past 5 years. The kids are aware of this injury. I think everyone's aware of this injury. In fact, the comments earlier today, we may be a bit too aware of this injury because we're fearing this injury and maybe fearing it more than it needs to be feared. I mean, I think kids are safer now than they've ever been by some of the changes that have been put in place over the last couple decades. So we're already, the concussion of our kids today was not the concussion of 20 years ago. Those were largely ignored. Get up, dust yourself off, smelling salts, my word, you know. And now you're out of the game, you're on an observation period, and you know what? You're a kid. This is not professional sport. We don't need you back in the game today. We're going to assess you, and we're going to watch you for the next 24 to 48 hours if we need to. And we're only going to allow you to go back in when it's absolutely safe for you to do that. And that alone makes the injury much different than it used to be. And sometimes you get mixed, you get caught up in the entire field, but that is the fundamental truth. These are different injuries now than they were before. And we have to watch that we don't apply what we're finding about yesterday's concussions to today's concussions. They're being reported at rates that are up to 250 times what they were of 20 years ago. We're not having more concussions. We're just reporting concussions, and they're being reported at subtler concussions than they were previously. It's crazy thinking that at one stage, one of the definitions, you had to be knocked unconscious before people would agree you had a concussion. That's outrageous today. So things are changing. Now, as for the medical record, this is a tricky one because we do want people to go from sport to sport. So we really need almost a passport system to keep people safe. However, on the receiving end, it's a culture. If we have a culture of disclosure, everyone knows that's dangerous, hiding concussions. I think increasingly the message for our kids is don't hide the concussion. Declare the concussion. Get better from concussion. Play your sport.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Thank you, Dr. McCormick. It's been a pleasure having you here and hearing from you. We want to thank you for your commitment to sport as well as to health. The committee, if there is something that we didn't ask you, that you have an opportunity to present any report or any submission that you would like to our analysts before April 12th so that we can get it into our report as we look to get a report together and recommendations that we will be tabling in the House of Commons by this late spring. So we thank you again on behalf of all the committee members and to the Canadian Olympic Committee as well as to the Canadian Soccer Association. Thank you. That concludes our meeting.